Okay, today is the 25th of June 2022, and we'll talk about two very important architects. We'll start with Harry Seidler, who was born in 1923 and died in 2006, while Alvaro Siza, he is 89 years old today. But let's talk a little bit about Alvaro Siza. That is, if Zoom is allowing me or PowerPoint presentation is allowing me to advance. Okay, it is, but after some struggles, as always. Harry Seidler, as you can see, he was born on the 25th of June, 1923, so meaning 99 years ago, was an Austrian-born Australian architect who is considered to be one of the leading exponents of modernist methodology in Australia and the first architect to fully express the principles of the Bauhaus in Australia. I don't know. I mean, you know, this is a short bio note from Wikipedia. I think things are more complex. He also studied in the United States and even at the Black Mountain College, very avant-garde college in the United States, which I didn't know until now that he had an architecture department. Maybe he didn't, but I'm sure the influence of that very forward-looking college. Yesterday I showed at the end of the presentation on Benedetta Tagliabue a fragment of you know, the stage design she did for Merce Cunningham. Merce Cunningham, the choreographer, he taught at the Black Mountain College, where Harry Seidler was a student apparently for some time. You see, education is very, very important. If you grow up, if you are educated in a climate of forward-looking, you know, aspirations, call them avant-garde if you want or not, inevitably you become kind of like that too. It's normal, no? Because that's the environment that you grow up in, you are educated in, and you continue in a way what you saw and felt and so on in school. Seidler designed more than 180 buildings. That's not a little, and he received much recognition for his contribution to the architecture of Australia. Seidler consistently won architectural awards every decade throughout his Australian career of almost 58 years across the varied categories. His residential work from the 1950s, his commercial work from 1964, and his public commissions from the 1970s. He was a controversial figure throughout his long career, as he regularly publicly criticized planning authorities and the planning system in Sydney. What about that? I think that we need people like Seidler, you know, to stand for what one believes in. Let's not allow bureaucracy to have the upper hand. No, because a bureaucrat doesn't know about architecture. A bureaucrat usually doesn't have any sensitivity about the city, the people, and so on, and certainly not cultural matters. So let's not allow the bureaucrats to rule us. Stand up, architects, and Harry Seidler did that. So here is a picture, sorry for the small resolution, with none other than Walter Gropius on the left, the founder of the Bauhaus, and on the right, Harry Seidler. Here he is in his older age as a successful, though, Australian architect. In another picture with some taller buildings that he built, elegant and, you know, like a man who had his share of fun, so to speak, in the world. Now we start with the Rose Seidler house. What happened is he emigrated to Australia. He came from an affluent family in Austria. Then his family also relocated in Australia. So he built a few houses for his own family. This is for Rose Seidler house, the Rose Seidler house. I don't know, maybe she was his mother. 1948, 1950. And yeah, this is a modern house, no? Explicitly so, and I think it has virtues. It's almost taking off, as many buildings want to take off, as if gravity was a calamity. But there is the connection with with a ramp to the earth, and so the building is making a concession, so to speak, to its earthly base. I like the fact that he also uses color. You see that reddish, red actually, not reddish, red the door. I also like what he did with the windows that are, framed in a, in a varied way. So, all in all, it's a building which is not too stiff, I would say. Although its modernism is rather predictable, but you have to consider the year when it was built, 1948. So, almost 80 years ago. This is the plan. In essence, it's not a complicated house. It's an opulent house, an opulent small house or smaller house, because of course there are bigger houses than this. And then the ramp, which adds a little bit of drama to the building. That's it. Harry Seidler. I like this image, where you have the fresco on an external wall of the house. And let's look in the plan where this is. It's probably here on this wall. I'm not mistaken. I think this is the terrace, the veranda, the loggia. Yes, that's it, because we see the ramp. I also like the fact that he used the stone. So it's not just a modernistic whitish building supported by thin columns or poles, but also, including carnal tectonic stone wall. And this, loggia, if I'm to call it so, it's somewhere in between a patio and the loggia. I think is very pleasant, and also the artwork there has some contribution to the pleasant feeling. Another house for the Julian Rose. I don't know who this is, but connected with Rose Seidler. He built at the beginning for his family, essentially. Again, it's a building that stands out still, I think, with a modernism that is, I would say, still fresh. If this building was built today, I'm sure it would have been made public immediately, perhaps. So again, from 70 years ago, Harry Seidler built in Australia, in a convincing, fresh, vigorous, modern way. I like the car too, although obviously it's not, contemporary or modern, but it looks like a nice car. He was lucky because he came from an affluent family. So when they moved to Australia, their fortunes came with them. Harry Seidler. the structure itself has elegance, and the structure doesn't disappear in the final image of the work. It's actually easily recognizable. And, so it's my opinion that a good building, even during the construction process, has some beauty and some coherence, some integrity. And in this case, you see between this phase of the construction process and this one, the final image, there is no contradiction. There is a continuum. Another one, for Marcus Seidler, another Seidler, 1951, 1953. Again, the participation of the ornament of art, if I am to express myself in this way. And I truly think our white walls do need some splash of color, maybe even some rebellious graffitis. I am all for it. We cannot reduce architecture just to whiteness and whiteness and whiteness. Although Alvaro Siza, about whom we'll talk later, not much later, because this is a rather short presentation, and perhaps Seidler needs a more developed presentation. But still, we are paying homage to him on his birthday, even if we are doing it with an incomplete presentation or an imperfect presentation. Harry Seidler, the Austrian architect who lived and worked for a long time in Australia, and this house was built in Australia. Australia, which continues to have a very remarkable contemporary architecture. They have good architects, and they continue to surprise the architecture world. Now, I said this before, did these walls, this one and this one, need to extend so much for functional reasons? Of course not. But for aesthetical reasons, I think they are legitimate like this. So architecture is not just about, function per se. It's also about the function of beauty. Harry Seidler. Now, tower from 1958 to 1961 in Sydney, and the tower it is. And I think it's okay. It's not superficially flamboyant. It has a convincing rectangularity. And as this, when was it built? 1958, 1961. Yeah, it has a certain seriousness, and even I would call it some kind of a heroic rectangularity, which is both assertive and modest. I don't know if I expressed well what I wanted to express, but I think it's a good tower. It's a good tall building by Harry Seidler. And you can see the opera in Sydney, from across the water, from the tower. So I guess it's in a very good location. Again, 1958, 1961. So, more than 60 years ago. Please remember, this is the man, this is the architect who fought with the planning commissions and with the bureaucrats of Sydney for what he believed in. And again, I think we should do the same in our time and place. Australia Square Tower in Sydney, 1961, 1967. The round square, that is, it's actually about the tower in that square, and the tower is round for all to see, clearly round, images from construction. Again, you know, the integrity of the structure is shown from the very beginning during the construction process. And the accomplished tower, the finalized tower, is not in contradiction with what we see in earlier phases of the construction process. There is a continuum. Anyone would recognize this as being part of this. He also built in Vienna. Of course, being an Austrian and becoming famous, he was invited back to his native country. I don't know though if I have that building that he built in, maybe he has more than one. I saw only one in Vienna, a very tall, actually a housing complex. Okay, what is this? Again, Sydney apartment buildings, an apartment building, 1963, 1965, but no pictures. What's going on? Maybe I couldn't find them. Anyway, sorry about this. Now the roundhouse, Harry and Penelope, his wife, Harry and Penelope Seidler house in Killara, Sydney, 66, 67. And again, I like the fact that he combines concrete work with steel work, with organic materials, stones or wood or color. He adds sometimes color. So he's not dogmatic, and he's not timid, and he's not you know, restricted by a palette of you know, elements, architectural elements, which I think is good. You know, because the work becomes more hybrid, richer, more complex, and more human, more even connected with nature, as we can see here. Okay, it doesn't have the purity of the Farnsworth house by Miss van der Rohe, but it's a different kind of architecture, and I'm tempted to value more this one as opposed to the pristine beauty and perfection that you can't almost know. You can almost know, you can almost be unable to breathe, like in the perfection of that building that I mentioned by Miss van der Rohe. Here you can breathe, here you can live. It's less perfect, less ambitiously, you know, absolute in its aesthetics, but it's closer to life, I would say. I'm not saying that this is a masterpiece necessarily, no, but it's a building meant for life here on Earth, with its limitations, with its problems, with its imperfections, and so on. Maybe that is Penelope, his wife. Anyway. a condominium in Acapulco, condominium apartments in Acapulco, Mexico. It happened that I had the chance to be in Acapulco for more than a week, and I have to tell you that I was impressed by the Mexicans. You know, the Mexicans are not as Mr. Trump, the former US president, depicted them. Of course, there are negative human elements in any society, but I found very sophisticated, proud, cultured people. And there is a beauty in Acapulco that, yes, it is destined for tourists, but there is also a lot local population, and it's an old culture, and they have an excellent architecture. In this case, yes, it was Seidler who built in Acapulco, and there were other architects building in Acapulco, but they have their own excellent architects in Mexico or Mexico. Anyway. Now, these are not for proletarians or for poor people, this kind of buildings, and certainly not in Acapulco. But, you know, I like to think that Harry Seidler also built for those less privileged. I don't know. I'm not truly an expert in Harry Seidler. We just look at some of his buildings, and I still think he's an architect that must be known. Now, Acapulco is a place of pleasure. Now, it's a place destined for, you know, spending a vacation, or, you know, it's a touristic destination. And these images show it. What is this? In Canberra, Australia, again, the Edmund Barton building, 1970, 1974. You know, he built a lot, 180 buildings. Some of them are maybe, I don't know, they belong to their time. This is a huge building, some kind of an office building. You can imagine, you know, we look at this picture and then we look at the plan. So we see actually a fragment of the whole building. He was quite successful as an architect. You see it from the air. It's a citadel, probably office buildings. Interesting, the ground floor plan. Otherwise, you know, an architecture which one could find also in the United States, built around that time, you know, plenty of office buildings in affluent countries. But it has a certain level of integrity, you know, sincere vigor that, you know, wouldn't make one, you know, excessively critical, I would say. The Embassy of Australia in Paris, in France, 1973, 1977, and Paris it is, you can't miss it. An interesting building. And, you know, I had seen more stiff embassies than this one, built by Seidler in Paris. Interesting concrete work, structural work here as well. So we remember Harry Seidler was born in Austria, but lived and worked for the majority of his life in Australia. Okay, that's it. An imperfect, rather short presentation on Harry Seidler. Let's wish him happy birthday. And now we go to a very important contemporary architect, that is Alvaro Siza. Let's talk a little bit about this architect who also received the Pritzker Prize, as I told you. Alvaro Siza, Portuguese. So Alvaro Joaquim de Melo Siza Vieira, I don't know what follows there, some titles, I guess. Born on the 25th of June, 1933. So he is 89 years old today. Let's wish him happy birthday. He's a Portuguese architect and architectural educator. He's internationally known as Alvaro Siza, and in Portugal as Siza Vieira. This is interesting. So outside of Portugal, he is known as Alvaro Siza, but in Portugal, is known as Siza Vieira. So I had the chance to attend a conference by him in New York City in 1990s, and I even wrote kind of a reply called apropos of Alvaro Siza's lecture. And I learned from that lecture by Alvaro Siza about a great, great, great Portuguese poet. Alvaro Siza said that Fernando Pessoa is the name of the Portuguese poet, influenced him a lot. I never heard of Fernando Pessoa until then, to my shame, but afterwards I searched for his work, and I have to say is an impressive poet who with very simple words says a lot. So if you like poetry or poetical thought, I suggest to you to search for the poems of Fernando Pessoa. He died rather young, at 47, I think, or so, Fernando Pessoa. But by the way of Harry Seidler, I just remember that Fernando Pessoa, the poet so admired by Alvaro Siza, said, "It must be beautiful in Australia as long as you don't go there." And there is some truth in this, because always from far away, things look beautiful. But once you go to that place where there are these beautiful things, perceptions change. It's rather common and normal, actually. So this is Alvaro Siza. As I said, he's 89 years old today. And let's wish him again happy birthday. Smoking. So I wonder what the doctors and the scientists say, because they say that smoking kills. Well, this man, I mean, I don't know his age in this picture, but he must be around 80 or so. Look how he smokes vigorously, and he is 89 today. So I don't know what he smokes, but it's very possible that sometimes, at least, cigarettes do not, and smoking do not kill. Here he is with his wife. A very interesting picture in a way. He was 7 years older than her. She was a painter, an artist, and she died at 33, which is rather young. And I read that actually of some kind of a depression post-childbirth. I'm very interested in her actually, in comparing the works of Alvaro Siza with the works of, I think her name is Antonia Maria Siza. I wish I had more information about her, and even to show some of her artworks. Maybe in the future, if I present again the work of Alvaro Siza, I will talk about her too, because I think it is important. I think women need more acknowledgement, and in this case, perhaps even more, considering that she died at a young age, 33. And they had 2 children together, and one of them is an architect who I think works now. Well, it might be that he actually works on his own at this point. their son, one of them. And I think also they had a daughter. Anyway, this is what he said. Beauty is the peak of functionality. Kind of a mysterious statement in a way, because we think of functionality having nothing to do with beauty. But in a way, he's right. But I don't know. I'm a little bit perplexed because, for example, what do you make of the statement of John Ruskin, who said the most beautiful things in nature are those that are the most useless, or not just in nature, in life. And he gave us an example, the peacock's tail, or the lily, the plant, the flower. Well, I don't know. I don't know. It depends what we understand by functionality. It depends what we well, I guess it's less capricious to interpret the word beauty, but the word functionality, because, for example, beauty itself has a function, the function of beauty, and it's an important function. And architects should never forget this, that an important function of architecture is beauty. Not to speak about the fact that Dostoevsky was perhaps right when he said that beauty will save the world. He didn't say function will save the world or functionality will save the world, but beauty. But what is beauty? We can talk forever and ever and ever, and it's subjective. It's not objective. You cannot measure it, really. Although some so-called objectivity could be achieved to an extent, but not completely, I would say. Drawings. He drew, by the way, Alvaro Siza is presented not just as an architect, but also an artist. I don't know what art he practiced besides the art of drawing, because he draws very atypically for an architect. His drawings are very, very poetical and even melancholy. They show even a certain pessimism. Their drawings, they are very lyrical. And perhaps his drawings encourage one to, again, express himself, herself poetically, imaginatively, artistically. Even when he does, architectural drawings, like you see him here, does he have a cigarette in his hand? He probably does. But you see some drawings there on the wall. They are drawings of an artist who actually teaches construction at the University of Porto. In the School of Architecture in Porto, he doesn't teach, the atelier or, so-called architecture. He teaches construction. And this is very interesting because he is the soul of an artist, but he teaches construction. And actually, I'm happy he teaches construction because it shows that he was determined to attack architecture at its core, at its, not its scientific side, but its, its other side, not the artistic one, but the technical one. And this is interesting. A man clearly with an artistic soul teaches construction at the School of Architecture in Porto. You see his drawings. Would you imagine that a man who does this kind of drawing teaches construction at the Porto University? It's hard to imagine. Of course, it's possible, and it's clearly possible in his case, but it's not what one would imagine. Now, I like the drawing very much. Look at this drawing. Look at this human being there. These are drawings of a man, who obviously likes to dream. Even here, the cigarette in his hand, left hand, and the right one drawing. The drawings of Alvaro Siza are indeed expressions of a man who understands, explores architecture through drawing, and the drawing is very, very important. You know, sketches. He's not so much, he's not so concerned with the literal truth of a building, but with the atmosphere, maybe his mental perception of what the building might become or could become. And I would encourage all students of architecture to do the same. Dream with your pencil in your hand, or dream with a mouse in your hand, meaning if you work digitally, allow the dream to animate your vision of the building that you want to make. He's not an architect, a cold-blooded rationalist, although there are aspects of his buildings, and I have seen a building, an apartment building he built in Venice, that could puzzle one, because it does look like a rationalist building, and very wilt and rather cold in its lack of accidents, and he could have that side, but his drawings are always very, I mean, look at this drawing. Look at this drawing. This is a drawing of an architect who dreams. And you certainly not say that this is an architect who made this drawing. Well, it is. The Pritzker Prize laureate, Alvaro Siza. These are images drawings made for the building Bonjour Tristesse in Berlin, which is a building that I like the most, and which I like a lot, and you are going to see it. Alvaro Siza Vieira, drawing and space. What about drawing and time? Still, architects are encouraged to think only of space. But Vito Acconci was probably right, or he might have been right too when he said architecture is about time, not about space. And I actually think the drawings of Alvaro Siza do not neglect time. But look at this drawing, it's oniric. Now, what does that big horse have to do with that little house at its feet? So he's approaching reality, the visual reality, with a freedom that commonly architects do not display. He's a lyricist, graphically speaking. Sorry. Actually, I don't know what the picture is there. It shouldn't be there. Anyway, but look at this drawing. I don't know what is this, because I didn't. Very strange. I don't know why these things show up. And you see, they show up without me activating any button on my laptop. Anyway, an interesting accident in the presentation. So here he is. Some of his works. He built a lot, but I'll show some of his important works. Not all of them. This presentation also deserves to be amplified, but you'll have, I would say, a rather coherent image about Alvaro Siza at the end of the presentation. So let's begin with this early house that he built. I don't know why it was called the bomb house, the Beires house, which I like very much. It's this house. I couldn't find too many pictures that are very satisfying in terms of resolution, but I think you'll be able to have an idea about this house. Why do I like it? I found an article about Alvaro Siza called something like Alvaro Siza, or the work of Alvaro Siza between tradition and modernity. In this house in particular, I do see that, you know, like the windows, they are not, you know, totally so-called modern, but the geometry of the house, and particularly if you see, after you see the plan and you are going to see it, you'll understand that it's actually a courageous house, courageously modern, and with a certain level of fragmentation and erosion. So there is almost a touch of, maybe I shouldn't risk to use the word deconstruction, because it's not a deconstructivist architecture, but it's more fragmented, in a way more tortured than most of his other works. Or at the level of appearance, it's a very fine building, in my opinion, and it's an early house by Alvaro Siza. Now, please keep in mind the glass work in this house, and we'll compare it when we arrive at the last slides, the last images of the presentation, when I will show a skyscraper, a tower he built in Manhattan, in New York City, and compare the way he worked with the glass here with the way he worked with the glass there. I think it's important to mention this and to talk about the difference between one and the other. I mean, I made no secret, and I always say it, I like the fact that the glass is divided in smaller units, smaller parts. So it's not just a, you know, one large piece of glass. And this brings some sensitivity to the glass facade. And I would strongly suggest that if you do use glass, but in my opinion, glass should be diminished in its size in your projects because of sustainability issues, you know, climate warming, and so on. With glass, you have energy, the levels of energy consumption are higher, and you know, the bills that you have to pay are higher, and you know, there are all kinds of implications. The more glass, the more you need you know, artificially pumped air. You need to be careful with glass. And the glass could be, to use the title of an article by Andrea Kahn, a North American architect, demagogical, because the glass promises you what it actually doesn't quite deliver. With glass, yes, you see through glass, and you have the illusion that the frontier between the outside and the inside disappear. But it doesn't disappear. It's just visually. It is through looking, through the eye, but the barrier is still there. So I think we should think about the great virtues of the glass. But this kind of glass, you know, and here is a touch of tradition, just like you have those chairs around the table. Now the chairs, he didn't design the chairs, but maybe it's not an accident that that furniture is inside this house, which is a modern house, but it's also a little ambiguous. And I think the way he resolved the glass matter, so to speak, has to do with it. Here you see the plan, which I like very much. The plan of the house, you know, is the way, it's almost as if the house was determined to not open itself too much towards the outside, and it is eroded at one corner, and in that corner he accommodated you know, the glass partitions. Here you see better. the plan of the house. Unfortunately, in my opinion, his later works, maybe there are other exceptions too. I was ready to mention the apartment building in Berlin, Bonjour Tristesse, where he has certain, deviations from rectangularity. But in many of his works, he doesn't do so much what he does in this house. And there is something that I like about the plan, particularly the plan of this house, because it has a certain drama, a certain, it is a little bit contorted. And, there are interesting things, like, for example, look at this door here, for this bathroom in the corner. It's unusual now to enter a bathroom or any room through the corner like this. There are elements of what I would call tortured architecture, and I think torture is part of life. I mean, torture, I'm talking about suffering. I feel there is some suffering in this plan. Maybe he built this house around the time his wife passed away. I don't know. I have to verify this. It could be that it is not so. I don't know. Now, the apartment building in Berlin that I mentioned, Wohnhaus Tor, Bonjour Tristesse. Bonjour Tristesse is the title of a book published in France, but it's someone wrote on the corner of his building at the top, Bonjour Tristesse. It wasn't him, but the building is known as being Bonjour Tristesse. You see here at the top, it's written Bonjour Tristesse around this opening into the top part of the building. I like this apartment building very much because of its modesty, because of its discrete, deviations from rigid rectangularity in plan, particularly towards the courtyard or the back of the building. There is some movement, but in the facade towards the street, that movement is rather discrete, and I like the discreteness or discretion of the aesthetics of the facade. The windows are the same, or almost the same. Maybe there are small differences, but it might even be that they are the same. And you see the top, someone wrote Bonjour Tristesse, and it is rather appropriate for Berlin too, because Berlin also knew very well what suffering is, thanks to the calamity called the Second World War, which apparently Mr. Putin is not remembering. And you see here, elements of capriciousness, if I am to call them so. But these so-called elements of capriciousness are important in architecture and in any art and in any life as well. I talked about the exception. Well, the word exceptional is connected with the word exception. Exception is the opposition to rule, to regularity, to what is regular. You cannot arrive at something exceptional if you are serving the rule and the regulation. To arrive at the exceptional, you need to be an exception. And an exception is the opposite of the regular. Maybe we should think about it and create buildings which are exceptions. Thus, we have a chance to arrive at the exceptional. Is this building exceptional? I think it is in a discrete way. And this amplifies, I think, the quality of the building. Is it grayish? It is. It's a grayish building. In fact, it's a gray building. Is it a building with regular windows? Yes, it is. It has regular windows. Why does it stand out? I think this is a great art. To make something, stand out and be a little bit different, although there are elements in its crystallization of form, which would have made very easily possible the very opposite. That is to make a building like all the others. But this is not like all the others. Look at the elevation. If you look at the elevation, with the exception of the top, which in a strange way, very strange way, because the building is not in any way trying to emulate Antoni Gaudi, but there is some kind of a very discreet gesture of kind of like a distant hello, from Germany to the master Catalan, there at the top. I don't know, it just crossed my mind. I'm thinking aloud. But if you look at the building, otherwise the regularity of the windows, you would say, what is this man talking about? This has nothing to do with La Pedrera. Well, it doesn't, but at the top, there is a slight clin d'oeil, as the French would call it, rascocule, a clin d'oeil towards, I would say, the surrealism of the Catalan master. And look at the drawings. Are they the typical drawings of an architect? Well, not really. They are dreamy. They are drawings of a lyricist, a graphic lyricist. And look at the plan. I like the plan very much. Here I also see some suffering. The contortions, even the domestic drama. In a way that we are all confronted with, that there is a drama in anyone's life. Life is not easy, but life is beautiful, full with its joys and its suffering and its bonjour tristesse, and I think architecture should attempt to feel more and think less, to feel, to welcome feelings, even feelings of remorse, of nostalgia. And I'm sure he built this after his wife died. So I'm absolutely sure it was a great tragedy for the family, and for him, of course, to lose your wife when she's 33 and he's 89, so he lived after her death for 56 more years this year, 56 years more. Okay, now another interesting work, the Portuguese National Pavilion at Expo 1998. So the previous building, I think, was built around 1987, because at that time, Berlin invited many important architects to build apartment buildings in the city. So this was done around 1987, and then 11 years later, he built this Portuguese National Pavilion in Lisbon. Here it's true, I should study more Alvaro Siza, because I'm a little bit conflictual. I don't understand very well this, for example, this part of the building here that is so, imposing in its, rectangularism. And I don't know, there is something here, you wonder, this is the man, you saw his drawings. His drawings are very lyrical, almost oniric. But then, I understand Giorgio de Chirico also had, although he was a surrealist painter, at least in his early paintings, and he used, regularity. But then in the Italian context, classical architecture, there is a possible surrealism connecting with classicism even. Although you say classicism should belong to reason, to Apollo, to light, and have nothing to do with the contortions and the complications of the surreal spirit. But in this case, it's, I don't know, it's very strict, and I would say Okay, I risk. I did think of something that perhaps I should not make public, but I didn't think of the words Portuguese fascism. I could be totally off, and I apologize. It's even more surprising that, you know, despite the fact that he built this, another part of the building is this, you know, this, I don't know how to call it, this almost surreally thin covering that connects this part of the building with the other one. Look here. This is an unbelievable image, you know, because I don't know enough about the building, what kind of a function is in this building and what kind of a function is in this. This was built for the, you know, an expo, I guess, World Expo in Lisbon. I like to imagine that this constructive effort, elegant as it is, has some symbolic meaning and value. It's you know, it's a sublime engineering here, and even architecturally is unique. Not so much I hope I have other images. You see, for example, in this section, why did he do it like this? I don't know. You see it also in the elevation. It's very courageous in a way, but in other places, Alvaro Siza builds kind of in this way. I remember the building I saw in Venice. I don't know. Is it? I'm tempted now to think that behind the Apollonian architecture that he seems to somehow advocate and build, there is some pessimism. And is this strange combination between the god of light and reason, Apollo, and pessimism? I don't know if I expressed well, but this pavilion, I mean, look how strict it is, architecturally speaking. It's almost, yeah, I find it, I appreciate the fact that it is not showy. It's not, it doesn't have a showy exuberance. You know, the world exhibitions in general have just that. But here there is a spirit which confuses me a little bit, with the exception of this truly remarkable, you know, surface of concrete that floats above this huge space. But what is on the left and what is on the right is an architecture which confuses me because of its strictness in a way. It just came to my mind. If you search for Fernando Pessoa, the poet that Alvaro Siza was so fond of, please search for the poem The Tobacco Shop. The Tobacco Shop, Tutungeria, the Tobacco Shop. It is absolutely sublime. It's beautiful. By the way, Fernando Pessoa, I will repeat something that I said in other occasions because it amuses me and it does say something about him, and maybe it says something about Alvaro Siza as well. When he was working in an office, Alvaro Siza liked a woman, a lady, a girl in the office. And, you know, the only way he expressed his affection for her was, you know, a drawing was found, I think after his death, or he wrote something about this. He was accompanying the girl home when they left work, and he thought of the longest way, you know, from the workplace to her home, because he wanted to be the longest time with her. That's why, of course, and every lover knows this. Unfortunately, this happens often with taxi people, taxi drivers. They take you the longest way in order to earn the most. But apropos of love, Fernando Pessoa also said something memorable, which I like sometimes to quote because I totally agree with. He said, you know, those who, well, apparently those who write love letters are considered ridiculous. Of course, the cynics will say, why would you write a love letter? But Fernando Pessoa said, those who write, not those who write love letters are ridiculous, but those who do not write them. And I totally agree with them. In the long run of things, those who are totally ridiculous are those who do not write love letters. And I would say this is also true of architecture or projects in architecture. Those who are ridiculous are not those who express their intuitions, their dreams, wild as they are or not, their fantastic longings. No, it's not them who are ridiculous. Ridiculous are those who do not do it. It's exactly the same thing, because when you love, you become so-called irrational, but you let your emotions come out, and it's always better to let your emotions come out. So again, if you are in love, express your love, write love letters, and not one, 10 a day, maybe even 50 a day, maybe even 100 a day. Write love letters. If you do not write them, you become ridiculous. And the projects again, make your projects with that ardent love, and then you'll see. You'll see. Don't be timid. Don't shy away. That's what I think. Now, building on the water, another building by Alvaro Siza, a more recent building in China, and then on water it is indeed. I mean, it's just unbelievable. These Chinese, I know they love the proximity of water, but in this case, I mean, they probably spent more on bringing all that water there around the building than on the building itself. I personally think, although I love the proximity of water to buildings, but I don't know. There is some, I mean, it's some kind of a, I know I will express myself controversially, some kind of a demagogical ecology. It's, there is a certain flamboyance because of the dimensions now of the water here, and the building is floating on water. I don't know. I mean, not far away from this Apollonian building, although it is curved and all the rest, we see, the pollutants, the industries. And so I'm not so sure that this is telling the whole truth. It's all whitish and splendid, and there is a huge piece of water around it. But across the water, we see the pollutants, as I call them, and they are polluting right now in this very picture. So does this building truly connect with the realities of what is happening across the water? I'm not so sure. I mean, yes, it's I guess a good building in a way, but kind of too conveniently good. That's why I would like to show in parallel the artworks of Antonia Maria Siza, because I think she expressed in her artwork something that perhaps her husband Alvaro Siza didn't. Although sometimes he did, like in that first house that we looked at. I like this picture though. So again, we are in China, but look at that man. I don't know exactly what he does, but this combination between the pristine whitish or white architecture of Alvaro Siza, and then this man, with his boat could have been almost identical 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or maybe even more in the past. It's almost atemporal somehow, and you can see this kind of anachronisms in many times in the case of China. some very futuristic or modernistic buildings, and in the proximity of the buildings, we see people who are still part of that older China, even the communist China, Mao's China, and so on. But this building by Alvaro Siza is, in my opinion, in my opinion, now maybe some graffiti artists would add something to the building. It's too wide, for my taste, it's too wide, too conveniently wide under a blue sky or not, and surrounded by blue water. And it's so splendid, but I don't know its function. And I think its function is relating, they paid actually the pollutants across the water. So I have some doubts about the truth of this building in all its splendor. I do, because if it was built out of guilt by these monsters of technology, then what I said is almost made legitimate by this fact. They don't connect. They don't connect, in my opinion, and this is a problem. Too much whiteness. You see the glass here is not the glass of the first house that we saw. It's something is wrong here. It's too much, the convenient language of architecture of the present. No, I don't have the highest admiration for this building. It's too white. It's too conveniently pleasing somehow. It's something is wrong with it, in my opinion. But anyway, that's my opinion. I prefer much more the Bonjour Tristesse building in Berlin by far, because he is serving here the techno elite, the industrialists of China, and actually misleadingly through this white Eden, through this white paradise, very slick and glittering and without doubts and shadows and torments. But and that window there, accidental as it is, doesn't really bring back the reality of life as lived, in my opinion, although it attempts to do so, with its continuously moving shadow, or the absence of a shadow through the light that goes through. Now, it's an architecture I cannot agree with, because it is trying to mimic a sublime which at bottom is actually absent. There is some untruth, in my opinion, here. Sorry, Mr. Siza. Happy birthday to you. I am paying homage to you, but I cannot restrict myself from not saying what I feel and think. If he would have somehow reflected, but maybe it was not possible, or I think it could have been possible. It could have been possible, but he didn't, he just constructed this splendor on water, making total abstraction of what's going on here across the water, and they paid for this. The China Museum of Design, Bauhaus collection, Alvaro Siza and Carlos Castañera, he's a partner, collaborator, probably in the present as well. The Bauhaus collection, of course, the prestige of the Bauhaus arrived in China too. I wonder what Mao would have said about the Bauhaus collection. Sorry about all these drawings. I probably took them from Arch Daily. They have lots of drawings and I'm grateful to them, but sometimes they are too many and too whitish and too clean and too distant. Look at this. So this is where the Bauhaus collection is in China. I love the tree, and I like that human being there who, attempts to bring some disorder to that wall. that wall has a certain lyricism because of the different, shades of color that I don't know if I imagine they are ceramic tiles, but otherwise the walls are quite massive. In my opinion, fortunately, there are some trees, and the trees are indeed beautiful. But otherwise, it's a very, again, I'm thinking of that pavilion that he built in Lisbon when I thought of those outrageous, unacceptable, and probably punishable words, Portuguese fascism. Even here, what is this? It's no windows at all. It's I don't know. It doesn't vibrate enough, in my opinion. It's too monolithical and too opaque, too misanthropic in a way. Fortunately, again, we have some human beings, who are almost atemporal. And I like this very much about China. I wish there were more of them around here, around the building. But the building by Alvaro Siza, Frank Lloyd Wright said that nothing wrong with architecture, or there wouldn't be any problem to do architecture if there wasn't to make windows, to put in those windows. Well, he avoided the windows altogether. I mean, there are some windows here, but all these large surfaces of wall without any opening in them is, I don't know. I don't find it very, very graceful, to be honest with you. I like walls, I like opacity, I like monumentality. But here, if there is a sign of life, there is more in the tree, I would say, than in the building itself. I actually like more the buildings which are not his, these ones here. Yeah, than what he did, in my opinion. Let's only hope that they will be covered by ivy just as these were, and then they will not be so, imposing in the, opacity. Let's hope. I'm sure otherwise there are qualities in the building, the function. Now I go back to where he says the beauty is the, the peak of functionality. I don't know. I'm not so convinced. I'm not so convinced. The inside of the museum, whitish, and I'm tired of these interiors of museums, all whitish, all the same, actually, all the same, well, all over the world. They are all the same. Now, of course, they ask for the painter to come in to bring his wild paintings and to hang them on the walls. But I prefer what Frank Lloyd Wright did at the Guggenheim. He made a building that was alive in itself, and I know some artists complain that they cannot hang the artworks because the building is dominating them now. It's not true. If the artwork is excellent, it will not be dominated by the genius of Frank Lloyd Wright. No. But here is too much whiteness and too, all these surfaces of, white and white and white. It's not for me. Okay, I'm subjective. It's not for me. At least that first house that we looked at was not white. Because is a museum just the repository of art? Is just some kind of a big depot, some kind of a big storage space for large amounts of art? Shouldn't the building also proclaim and manifest life and advocate life? Well, does this building really do that? It's massive, it's huge. And it's also, why did he use in this case this color? I like color, of course, but anyway. The museum in Brazil. This is interesting. It's an interesting museum, whitish as it is, the Iberê Camargo Museum, Porto Alegre. And here it is. I like very much that he brought the circulation, outside of the building in this rather unusual way. I think this is an interesting thing, but again, in my opinion, the building is not visceral enough, truly, and it kind of finds a refuge behind this. Yes, in terms of volume and the sculpturalness of the building is fine, but let's remember, some elements from the architecture of Harry Seidler that we talked about, where he employed stones, the various materials. Why didn't Alvaro Siza also employ, some materials that would connect with the trees and the landscape outside of the building? The building, again, in my opinion, is not totally telling the truth. With this whiteness, he is not. Yes, the volume, yes, the sculpturalness is, for all to see. But why did he reduce his architectural language to, this mono material and monocolor? Why? I find it problematic. And if I am to compare the Guggenheim with this building, I would say the building by Frank Lloyd Wright, although that building was not built in nature, was built in the middle of Manhattan, surrounded by other urban buildings. Here, the building is in nature, but somehow the building, because of this, I am tempted to psychoanalyze now Mr. Alvaro Siza. In my opinion, he is not, something is missing. His building is not porous enough, is not communicating enough with the outside. It's kind of opaque, and the movement of these elements that come out of the building try to diminish a little bit the sensation, but it still exists. And yeah, it bothers me. It bothers me. And the interior, again and again, white, 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 and white again. Look, too much whiteness, I'm sorry. Yes, fortunately, we have the art, but still the whiteness is dominant. Fortunately, there is the wooden material, the wood on the floors that breaks the deadly whiteness. The plan is interesting. It's true. It is interesting, but I still think the building, you see, has all these walls, continuous walls, opaque. There is a lot of opacity here. I don't think, maybe that's how he tried to avoid the problem of that was mentioned by Frank Lloyd Wright, windows. But the idea to bring the circulation between two parts of the building in this way is interesting, and can be, of course, if there is the necessary budget, it can be inspiring, and it can be used in other projects as a strategy. The Capella do Monte chapel in Portugal, hillside chapel. This one I like. I mean, I like with this human presence that is passing by and is photographed in this way. I think this accidental silhouette adds something to the building. I think without it, the building would have been less. But this, at first, I didn't quite see because I don't have the right pair of glasses. I didn't quite understand what it was here. Then I saw it. It's actually someone moving, a person, a human being moving, and I could talk a lot just about this photograph, about his architecture, and then a passing human being photographed as it is, with a focus on the building, not on the moving person. A chapel. It's not bad. I like it, and I like this rift also on this facade. You know, so you have the two-ness that is also present in many cathedrals and churches, but here is simplified and abstracted. I think without words, in its silent way, it does say, "I am a chapel." Maybe more than some, you know, I don't know if similar, you know, smaller works by Peter Zumthor. This one, somehow I feel that the religiousness or the religious feeling that the building should emanate or should externalize is more present in the works, in such a work by Alvaro Siza, if I am to compare with the aforementioned works by Peter Zumthor. A chapel. And it is a fine work. Here it doesn't bother me, the whiteness, because you have the wooden furniture and the lighting, and it's a smaller building, it's a smaller interior. It does have a subtlety, and it does have a, you know, certain reverence for the function of this building. And I like very much the, you know, the abstraction of the religious theme, you know, the cross and the crucifixion in a way, and Christ, you know, in a silent way, he says he's saying a lot. And that's how it should be, deeply felt religious building. This in itself is a very fine piece of, I don't know, I cannot call it furniture, it's sculpture, it's art, the art installation is, but it's as it should be. And everything is studied very, very well, very, very carefully. So there is a religiousness in the very act of handling every element of the building. Did he do this drawing? I don't know. Maybe he did. You know, another very fine lyrical drawing by this architect who does draw very well. But I don't know. Can you see the signature there? I don't know if they're by him or not. But whoever did them, and I imagined he did them, they are good. But still, now that I look at this picture, I am still a little bit bothered by all this whiteness. I prefer the chapel built by Luis Barragan under the ardent sun of Mexico, you know, with colors, but still colors, but colors that do not diminish the sacred feeling. Here there is a, I don't know, this whiteness to me is a little bit problematic, but that's maybe my problem. I don't know. Fortunately, towards outside there are the imperfections of the effect or effect of the elements, and they are welcome. I think. I think they add something to the building instead of subtracting something. you know, a sign of life. Like a sign of life is the tree as well, and the passing human being in this picture. Yes, if we eliminate this, and if we eliminate this, I think the building loses something. And if we eliminate this, and this, the tree, the beautiful tree. Because I think even a sacred building, or particularly a sacred building, should not be perfect, should connect with life, or it should be perfect in the sense of an imperfect perfection, or a perfect imperfection. Now we arrive at the last work that I show in this rather insufficient presentation of the works of Alvaro Siza. This is a recent work that he accomplished in Manhattan, in New York City. It was very recently finalized. 611 West 56th Street Tower, a residential tower. And here it is, splendidly white. It's not a bad building, but I have some questions about it too. If, again, from all the works that I showed, I think that early house that he built was the one where he showed the most his fragility. He does show his fragility in his drawings, in all of them, or most of them. And he did show his fragility in the Bonjour Tristesse building in Berlin. And he showed his fragility in that first house that I showed. The bomb house, for some reason, is called so. But in some of the other works, I see, like in this tower too, is it's very mundane, actually. I mean, I like the fact that the size of the rooms is not as big as some of these vicious developers like. So there is a certain feeling that some limits exist. But when I look at the windows, and that's what I was inviting you to reflect on, the windows of that first building that he built and the windows of this building, these windows don't open. They are not meant to be open. Here you need air conditioning. Air conditioning is not sustainable. Air conditioning is expensive. To clean this window outside is another issue, right? How do you do it? So I'm sorry, it is rather demagogical, the demagogical big piece of glass. And he uses them, uses them like everybody else. I would have loved him to use, some kind of, window as he used for that first building that we looked at. Again, I like that the rooms are not huge, although we'll see a living room larger than this one. But still, these are buildings for millionaires. I mean, these apartments are for millionaires. You cannot afford a building in a tower by Alvaro Siza in Manhattan without some millions. It's impossible. Look at this bathroom. Of course, it is splendid, but I lived in New York City for more than 20 years. I know New York City, there is a lot of poverty in New York City. There is a lot of less sublime reality in New York City. Does this building acknowledge in any way that? No, it doesn't. You would say, well, it's not the purpose of such a building to do so. And it's not the task of the architect to do that. I don't know. Just like in the building in China, which splendidly was surrounded by that huge surface of water, neglecting the pollutants across the water. Here, also, this building is in no way commenting or reflecting or, having a glimpse at or, some kind of a suggestion of the complexity of life in Manhattan, or New York City at large. It doesn't. It's a privileged seclusion, you know, and I don't know. I'm not very convinced, you know. It's probably pleasant to live here, but how do you feel, you know, knowing that New York City is much more than just this whitish splendor, you know? Maybe I have the wrong conception of architecture. Maybe architecture is not supposed to solve the ills of society, not even express them or evoke them or comment on them. But I am rather on the side of Frank Stella, who was not an architect and who said architecture in general seems to avoid the chaos of life. But he said, and I think he was right, he was an artist, and he said, if architecture does not bring something of that, you know, darker reality of life, you know, chaotic or not, is actually not telling the truth. And I have the feeling this building also is not quite telling the truth in all its splendor. I don't think it does. I'm sorry, Mr. Alvaro Siza, I respect you, I admire you, I pay homage to you, but there is something about it that doesn't totally convince me. Otherwise, yes, it is, I guess, moderately a good building. A good building, triumphantly, you know, asserting Apollo again, the god of light and reason and equilibrium, but that's not actually New York. And to be indifferent to the complexity of the urban phenomenon called New York, I don't think is the correct positioning for an architect or for anyone else. But in this case, we talk about an architect. Anyway, I think this is the last image of or maybe I'm wrong, but a similar image should be the last picture of this presentation. Apollonian, no, but Apollo was not the only god for the Greeks. There was also Dionysos. Thank you, and happy birthday to you, Mr. Alvaro Siza.